Hello, Santa Fe Spiritual Center. I am Jesse Jennings, coming to you from the stage of what we call the Great Hall here. Doesn't that sound impressive? Like the Hall of the Mountain King. The Great Hall here at Creative Life Spiritual Center. It's not just the pretty good hall, it's the Great Hall. It is our sanctuary. It is where we hold services, and today we had our second in-person service. And I am just thrilled to be with you to share some thoughts with you over the next few minutes. It is a joy to be with you today, this Sunday, which is actually kind of weird because in the interest of full transparency, I am recording this on Sunday, July the 18th, and you're watching it on Sunday, July the 25th. So I'm just knowing you had a wonderful week, and it kind of reminds me there's a man in one of the classes online I'm teaching who's in Australia, and so we keep asking him, what's it like tomorrow? And that was funny the first time, but he's moved on from it. Anyway, I'm Jesse Jennings here in Spring, Texas, coming to you from the stage of the Great Hall of Creative Life Spiritual Center, where we just finished our second in-person Sunday since the pandemic began. And I wanted to share some thoughts with you today about spiritual practice, risk and reward, or risk or reward. Spiritual practice. What is it about spiritual practice? Why doesn't the whole world eat this stuff up? That's a question that comes up a lot. Why isn't everybody in the science mind? And I think it's because there's a perceived risk. And the risk is disappointment. The risk is disillusionment. Here's what I mean by that. When I first came into Science of Mind, which was 45 years ago, 2 weeks ago, 45 years ago this summer, I came into Science of Mind. One of the first things they taught me was naturally about spiritual mind treatment. They had tracts and pamphlets and books, and presently I took a class on spiritual mind treatment, and I came to believe that spiritual mind treatment was the most potent spiritual practice anybody had ever heard of, and I thought it was just great, and I put it in my pocket, and I said, if I ever need this, I know where to find it. But I didn't practice it. I didn't use it. I didn't bring it out, thinking I'd wait till I was in extremity. And at that time in my life, as far as I knew at the time, things were going pretty well. So I didn't need this. It was an emergency tool. Consequently, when the time came later where I could have used it, I didn't really know how. It was rusty. I'd forgotten some of the hacks and the tools and all of this. And especially, I hadn't softened up my subconscious mind through meditation, through regular visitation of my inner divinity when I didn't need anything from it. So I'm a big advocate now for regular spiritual practice, but the risk, I realize now, the reason that I didn't take it out of my pocket and use it in those days was I thought it was so beautiful and so wonderful, and what if it broke? What if it got chipped or dented? What if it stopped working? What if this whole thing is a lie? You know? What if we say there's one life, and that life is source, and that life is all the life there is? What if that's not true? What if the whole thing is just chaos and randomness and so on? I couldn't face that. I couldn't stand that. And so a way to not know is don't try. Don't use the thing. Don't use the thing. Just know that it's there. What if I really wanted some great good in my life, and I did all the right steps, did all the right things, and still it didn't happen? The disillusionment would be profound. But we have to risk that. And this is what Ernest Holmes means, I think, when he says, you have to give it everything. He says, there's no something for nothing. There's no free lunch in this life. You have to give it your all. And this particular faith system, interesting as it is, requires the investment of belief on the part of the person who's doing the spiritual work prior to there being evidence that justifies that belief. First you step out in faith, then something happens. And that runs counter to everything we've been taught about being cautious and looking cool in life. See, the last thing we want in life typically is to be so surprised that we're thrown and we're awkward and uncool. And so to trust in something before there's any substantial reason to trust in it seems like a huge risk, which is why people very often in extremity come to spiritual practice that they had heard about before, but had neglected to pick up. We sit here at Creative Life Spiritual Center on a street filled with faith centers, and around the corner up onto the next avenue, there are all these different, for want of a better word, I'll call them houses of worship, okay, of all different denominations. In this particular neighborhood where we are, they are principally all Christian, but you go a little further and there's a Hindu temple and there's a Muslim mosque, and there are a couple of synagogues. And in all of these places, people gather and they seek entry into the experience of the divine. And right next door to us here is a little bitty church, little Baptist church. It's been there for a really long time. It's been there longer than we've been here, and we've been here a while. And when you get here to Creative Life, especially when we get back up to full speed with people coming and going off of the campus, and they do too, you'll notice on Sundays and other times, the people at this little church next door get out of their cars and they're carrying Bibles. And they go into their service and they sit in there a while and they come back out and they have Bibles. They have the Bible with them. They get in the car and they go home. And I think I know what they do when they get home. Not right away, first thing they have lunch. But they go home and they do Bible study. And they sit around the table, the parents and the children, if there are children, and the grandparents, and they sit there. And the pastor of that church will have said, well, today's lesson is from such and such, scripture, and they'll go to that, and they'll read it, and they'll discuss it and stuff. And that's regular. And I've watched this for years now, and not just there, but a lot of places do this, but this one's right out, the window. And I've watched them do this, and I've thought, why don't we do that in religious science? Why don't we do that? Why don't we have our Science of Mind textbook, or Living the Science of Mind, or any of this thing called You, or any of the books that we use in our classes? Why don't we have these like on our hip and carry them around with us and then go home and sit and discuss this stuff? It would be a beautiful, wonderful thing to do. And it's one form of spiritual practice that's really very powerful. Is to go. Sometimes I'm really honored when I hear that people who come to Creative Life, they'll sit through a talk, I'll be speaking, or one of our ministers will be speaking, and then they go to lunch and discuss it. That internalizes what you've heard down into the heart level and into practicality, and it goes down your arms and out your hands, into how you express in the world. So the risk is looking foolish if we bank it all on the oneness of spirit. The rewards I cannot begin to list, and I would exceed my time greatly with you by going through the rewards. But the principal one, if I had to sweep them all into a pile, is that you experience the divine directly and unmediatedly. This is back to the risk moment. This is, for centuries we've been warned away from this. People have said, no, you need to go through priests and ministers and saints and angels and all of this to get to God. And who do you think you are? Anyway, what do you need with him? What do you need with God? People have bigger problems than you do. And so we've shrunk away from this, thinking, God, if I were to go directly to the source, stand directly before the throne, and ask my asking, I'd have my head handed to me. We've lived in fear of source, whereas source is ubiquitous and loving and kindly. And I need a way to show that to myself. I need a way to know, how consciousness really works. Consciousness gets complicated in our teaching of it sometimes. We say, well, you're a co-creator. Have you heard this one? You're a co-creator with the infinite. What does that mean, to be a co-creator with the infinite? So I want to tell you a quick story that helps me understand. And I thought I did, because I've thought of myself as a co-creator for some time now, and I thought I really understood how that worked. And then I heard this story, and it put it all in perspective. And this is a story that you may have heard before, but I'll give it a spin, maybe you haven't. And it's called My Grandfather's Axe. I told the story here on this stage to our people about a year ago, so long ago that if they should happen to watch this, they will have forgotten. But it's a good story, and it bears repeating. And the story is about how you consecrate something, how you sanctify something, how you take something out of the mundane and into the sacred. or what in the old days they called the profane, into the sacred, an object that opens a door in consciousness to everything, my grandfather's axe. So the story goes like this, and it's actually a question that's used, a rhetorical question that's used in teaching philosophy sometimes. It just doesn't have an answer. I have an answer for it. I'll get to that. My grandfather's axe goes like this. Let's assume I had a grandfather and he had an axe. Now, I'm not a young man anymore, so and of course everybody has a grandfather. I did, and my grandfather, so this would have been in, 80 years ago. So my grandfather would have had an axe that he chopped wood with out in the country where they lived, I suppose, and made a fire to warm the family, or even cook their food, or clear the brush away. My grandfather's axe. Now, over the years, through his lifetime and after his lifetime, the axe getting used, the blade of the thing got chipped and dinged and dented. And so at some point, somebody said, let's put a new blade on it. And a new blade was forged, and it was attached to the axe. And the axe continued to be used, and at some point, through its usage and just the passage of time, the handle began to splinter and maybe rot a little, and it was loose, and it was kind of, worrisome, dangerous even. And so a new handle was put on the axe. And other repairs were made, like putting duct tape around it where the handle met, the shaft of the handle met the axe, went up into the blade, and so on. So here we are, 80 years later, let's say, and here's my grandfather's axe, and not one molecule of this axe is what this man held in his hands when he used it. But it's my grandfather's axe. Why? Because I say so. Because I say so. Because when I hold this, it makes me feel him. Makes me remember him. Brings all warm memories of continuity, that I belong in my family, that I have this item, that I've been entrusted with. Maybe I'm not an axe man, Maybe I don't have a great need to chop stuff up, but I have this thing now, and it reminds me of him. And that's the answer. That's the answer to the story of how can this be if not any of it physically is the same, because spiritually it's the same. If you think about it, it's not real surprising. When I was mentioning grandfathers, you might well have been thinking of your own. Both of them, You might well, and whoever else in your life has filled the role of grandfather who was not actually that. And it made you warm, and it made you happy. And it made you maybe a little misty-eyed, to think about your grandfather. That's the power of consciousness. You bought into the story, so you felt something. The person who has their grandfather's axe has refused to break the spell. And that, to me, is a lot of the management of consciousness, is refusing to break the spell, refusing to break character, refusing to step out of the scene. In other words, saying, I live in the midst of infinite good. I live in the midst of magic right now. And I will do nothing to disrupt that. I won't look for where the wires are hidden. I won't pull back the curtain and there's the little man like in the Wizard of Oz pulling the levers, I won't disrupt that, because what is my salvation, as well as my joy, is the feeling of being magically sourced by this life. So we all have the power to do that. And it can be the dashboard of your car. And I was telling the group here earlier this morning, I was listening to some music came out of the front of my car that I wasn't expecting, and it was just what I needed to hear today. And it wasn't what you'd think. It wasn't all like soft and ambient and whatnot. It was kind of loud and kind of aggressive and kind of in your face, and it was like, but it made me smile from ear to ear. I wasn't driving aggressively or acting out or anything. It just made me smile. It just made me happy. Well, the grandfather's axe is a predictable thing, because if you have it, you know that you have it, but you don't know what's around the next corner. You don't know what's coming to meet you, to remind you of your own magnificence, to remind you of your own agency in this life, that you are the beloved. You are the beloved, having an experience of yourself in this life, or as one teacher put it, spirit is having an experience of itself in this life at this time by means of you. And a teacher named Andy Carricker, who you guys in New Mexico may know or remember from the old days, he was one of the first generation of Ernest Holmes students. Andy Carricker said, "You are a focal point of infinite intelligence. You're a focal point of infinite intelligence everywhere you look." What I want more than anything else in my life and for you is to live in the experience of heaven on earth. That from time to time has to take stock and look around at world conditions and personal conditions and say there's time for a change, and this is not acceptable and this needs to be fixed, but does so in constant reference back to source, back to the place where nothing has ever been wrong. The place where nothing has ever been wrong is where we go in our spiritual practice. And when our Baptist friends gather next door and they sit around with their Bibles and all, they go into biblical times, but they go into their understanding. They go into what they call the God of their understanding. They go into the experience of spirit, of a power, of a saving power, of a blessing power, of a power of grace. And the rest of the world just kind of fades away for a moment. They go to that place. They go to the same place. They go to the same place that we in religious science go to. They just call it differently, and maybe they enter by a different door, you know? Maybe they come in by a differently labeled entrance, but it's all the same practice. The rewards of spiritual practice are immense. So what I encourage you to do is do your work. Do your work. Meditate, treat for world conditions, knowing that you don't have an answer, but there is one. You don't know, but there is something that does know. Treat to know yourself, your motivations, your intentions, your delights, the longing of your heart's desires, what these may be. Treat to know these things. Visualize world peace. And that's Ginny Hayes, and she was New Mexican, who created the Visualize World Peace materials 35 years ago. Visualize it. You're that powerful. You're that strong. I'll close with a treatment now, knowing there is one life, one power, one presence. This one is the essence of all creation, and all creation delights in it. Creation opens up under this one, the way flowers open to the rain and to the sun. You and I flourish when we remember the power that exists in and through us. Then we have the energy to rise up and do great, mighty things. Then we have the sympathy and compassion to be attuned to the needs of the people around us without intrusion or interference. Then we have a grasp on our goals, our ambitions, our purposes, even the reasons why we came to this earth at this time, to be in these bodies, to live in this way. The answers make themselves clear to us, even if we never find a way exactly to express those answers in words, to articulate. It is ineffable, this magical spread of spirit through us. And we are agents of healing and beneficial presences to all with whom we come in contact. And then all of this circles back to us. Circles back to us in the form of health and happiness and abundance, and most of all, love. All that which we seek. That which we seek is, in fact, seeking us. Or in a favorite expression, from the poet Hafiz from long ago. Ever since it heard your name, joy has been running through the streets trying to find you. Thank you, infinite presence of life, that this is so. And so it is.